All right, let's dive into something pretty interesting today.
Okay.
This is a deep dive into a case in Indonesia that really makes you think, when can giving legal advice actually become a crime?
Yeah.
We're looking at an amicus brief.
Okay.
This brief was delivered to the Jakarta Selatan Court,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all about this lawyer, Kenny Wishisanda, who is facing some embezzlement charges.
Wow. So
Yeah.
what's interesting here is that the brief actually says that Sonda was just doing what a lawyer does, you know?
Yeah.
It's pretty controversial because it implies that giving legal advice could be a crime.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And this isn't just coming from some random person.
Right.
This brief is from the Indonesian Advocate Solidarity Committee for Justice.
Oh, wow.
And this is a whole group of lawyers who are really worried about what this case could mean for their entire profession in Indonesia.
I can see why they'd be concerned.
Yeah,
This could have huge implications for the legal system as a whole.
absolutely.
Makes you wonder what the role of lawyers is in a society that's supposed to be governed by the rule of law.
Okay, so let's break down the details a little.
Sure.
Kenny Wishisanda, he's a licensed Indonesian lawyer,
Right.
and he worked as in-house counsel, which means that he was directly employed by a company.
Okay.
And that company was called PT Energy Equity Epic Senkang, PT, Ltd.
Okay.
But, people usually just shorten that to ES.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So this ES company, they got into a disagreement with another company called PT Energy Maju Abadi, or PTEMA. It was all about how they should split the profits from this big energy project they were both working on.
So Sonda, he was ES's lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
and he advised them, on how to deal with the money from this whole project.
Got it.
And this is where things get kind of complicated because
Right.
now he's being accused of helping with embezzlement.
Oh, so
Yeah.
the amicus brief, it brings up this legal idea of good faith,
Yeah.
which is a really important part of Indonesian law. Their argument is that Sonda was just acting in good faith. Basically, he was just doing his job as a lawyer and giving advice.
Right. Not trying to, break the law or anything.
Exactly.
It's interesting because you have what seems like a potential crime, but then you have this lawyer saying, hold on, I was just doing my job giving legal advice within the rules.
Yeah, it's strict.
So, where do you draw the line?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And the brief argues that it shouldn't be the police or the prosecutors deciding what good faith means.
Yeah.
They're saying that's the job of the Indonesian Bar Association's Ethics Council because they're the ones who really get the ins and outs of what lawyers are supposed to do.
So this is where those international examples come in, right?
Yeah.
From Singapore and the Netherlands.
Exactly.
Where they had similar cases with in-house counsel.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see how they handled those situations.
Yeah, they're pretty relevant because the brief uses those cases to show that this whole issue of protecting in-house counsel, it's not just an Indonesian thing.
Right, it's happening in other places too.
Exactly. Singapore made changes to their Evidence Act back in 2012.
Okay.
Specifically, they broadened the idea of legal privilege.
For those of us who aren't legal experts,
Sure.
could you explain what legal privilege actually means here?
Of course. So legal privilege, it's this basic, right, that protects conversations between lawyers and their clients. It keeps those conversations private,
Yeah.
The important thing about the changes in Singapore is that they made this privilege apply to in-house counsel like Sonda.
Okay, so does that mean in-house counsel get the same protections as lawyers who work at, regular law firms?
Well, not exactly.
I would-
Singapore added some conditions.
Right.
For example, an in-house lawyer has to have, real legal expertise, and they have to be acting only as legal counsel,
Right.
not wearing different hats within the company.
You can't just, call your friend legal counsel to try and cover up something shady.
Exactly. And now the Netherlands, they take a slightly different approach.
Okay.
Their legal system gives the same protection to independent lawyers and in-house counsel.
So wouldn't that mean that anyone could just call themselves in-house counsel and get these protections?
Well, that's where the rules come in.
Oh, okay.
In-house counsel have to sign a specific legal document.
Right.
This makes sure they're held to the same standards as any other lawyer.
So two different ways of doing things.
Yeah,
But both aim to protect lawyers who are genuinely doing their jobs.
exactly. And that's a key point the amicus brief emphasizes.
Yeah.
What happens if lawyers start getting scared to give certain advice because they think they'll be prosecuted?
Yeah.
It could really mess up the whole legal system.
It makes you think businesses might hesitate to even ask for legal help.
Right.
People who need legal help might not get it,
Exactly.
even if they're in the right.
It's a slippery slope.
It could make access to justice so much harder for everybody.
Absolutely, and that's what the brief wants the court to think about. Yeah.
Look at what Sonda did, but look at it through the lens of his job as a lawyer. Don't criminalize legal advice, especially in a democracy where lawyers are so important for protecting human rights.
It's a powerful argument.
Yeah.
So where does this leave Kenny Sonda?
Well, that's up to the Jakarta Selatan court to decide.
Right.
But this amicus brief has definitely shown a light on this much bigger issue. How do we balance upholding the law with protecting the very people who are supposed to help us navigate it?
It's such a vital question.
It is.
When does professional legal advice actually cross that line into criminal activity?
It's a question that's really relevant right now, and it'll be fascinating to see how the Indonesian court answers it.
Absolutely.
But there's another layer here we haven't even talked about yet.
You're talking about the Indonesian Bar Association.
Yeah.
And their role in all of this.
Right.
The brief seemed to emphasize that they should be the ones deciding on good faith, not law enforcement. Exactly. They're really highlighting the idea that the legal profession should regulate itself. You know, the idea that lawyers should be accountable to other lawyers.
Right, and their own ethical standards.
Exactly.
And this ties back to those international examples, too.
It does.
Both Singapore and the Netherlands.
Yep.
They have systems that rely on legal professionals.
Yeah.
You know, kind of policing their own.
Exactly.
To some extent.
It raises this fundamental question of who gets to decide when a lawyer crosses the line.
Right.
Is it the courts? Or should it be the legal community itself?
And this is not just some theoretical debate.
No, not at all.
This has real consequences for lawyers like Sonda.
Absolutely.
Imagine, being accused of a crime just for doing your job.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah.
And that's a big reason why this amicus brief is causing such a stir in Indonesia's legal world.
This case could really set a precedent for how in-house counsels are seen and treated, not just in Indonesia, but maybe in other countries too.
Absolutely. Legal systems are always changing.
Yeah. And this case could be a turning point.
So for our listeners who've chosen to join us on this deep dive, what are the most important things to remember as we continue?
I think the main thing is that lawyers are essential for a legal system to work properly.
Right. They're not just there to defend people who are accused of crimes.
Exactly.
They help all of us
Yeah.
understand and use the law.
They're crucial.
And when we start criminalizing legal advice, even if it was wrong,
Yeah.
we risk silencing those very people who are so important for upholding the rule of law.
Exactly.
This case really brings up some deep questions
It does.
about professional responsibility,
Yeah.
the limits of legal advice, and what ethical conduct even means in the legal field.
It's complex.
It makes us face this uncomfortable truth that even doing your job the best you can sometimes have really bad consequences.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It really is.
And for everyone listening, here's a final question to think about.
Okay.
If you were a lawyer in Indonesia right now,
Would this case make you hesitate before giving advice to your clients?
that's a really good question.
It is.
It makes you think about the balance between following the law and protecting those who help us through it.
And that's really the heart of this case.
Now, this brief also goes into some interesting historical arguments
It does.
about the role lawyers have had in shaping Indonesia. They talk about how lawyers have been agents of change, advocating for reforms in different areas,
Yeah.
which makes protecting them even more important.
Right.
Now, this is where things get really interesting.
Okay. The brief really digs into how Indonesian lawyers have been right at the center of pushing for positive change in the country.
Okay.
They break it down into three main roles:
Right.
legal reform, political reform, and economic reform.
So it's not just about, arguing cases in court.
Exactly.
They're saying Indonesian lawyers are actually shaping the whole development of the nation.
That's the idea.
So, for example,
Yeah.
with legal reform,
Yeah, legal reform.
the brief talks about all these lawyers who've been working so hard
Yeah.
to build these strong, dependable legal institutions.
It's about making sure the Indonesian legal system is truly fair.
Yeah.
Not just in theory, but in reality.
So making sure the laws are applied equally to everyone gets due process, those basic rights.
Exactly. But it goes even deeper than that.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
They argue that Indonesian lawyers have actually helped to build a culture of respect for the law itself.
That's a big deal.
It is. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's like encouraging people to solve their disagreements peacefully
Mm-hmm.
through legal means instead of resorting to, other ways.
So it's about changing how people think.
Exactly. Shifting those mindsets.
That's a massive undertaking.
It is. It's like reshaping how a whole society sees the legal system.
Yeah, wow.
And then you've got the political reform side of things.
Okay.
The brief highlights how Indonesian lawyers have been, leading the charge in protecting essential civil and political rights.
So things like freedom of speech, freedom of the press,
Oh, yeah, exactly.
the right to peacefully assemble,
Yeah.
the right to vote in fair elections.
All the crucial freedoms that make a democracy what it is.
They're saying Indonesian lawyers have been right on the front lines of the fight for democracy in their country.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay.
And then we get to the economic reform part.
Right. This is where I kind of get lost, to be honest.
Okay.
I don't usually think of lawyers as being involved with economics.
I get it, but think about it.
Okay.
You can't have a healthy economy without clear laws behind it, right?
Right.
Things like property rights, contract enforcement,
Oh, yeah.
regulations that prevent, fraud and abuse.
So lawyers are the ones who create and enforce those rules, kind of like setting the stage for the economy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They make sure businesses feel safe investing their money.
Yeah.
Knowing everyone's playing by the same rules.
And that encourages investment and helps the economy grow.
Exactly.
So they're arguing that protecting lawyers means protecting those core elements of Indonesian society. The rule of law, democratic values, and a strong economy.
Precisely. The brief is building this case that the work lawyers do, especially in a democracy that's still developing like Indonesia.
Yeah.
It's about way more than just representing clients in court.
Right. It's about the bigger picture.
Exactly. They're essential to a fair and just society.
This brings us back to Kenny Wishisando. Are they saying he was involved in these reforms when he gave his company advice about those funds?
Not directly, no.
Oh, okay.
But they're saying his action should be viewed within the context of his job as a lawyer.
Okay.
And that making legal advice a crime, even if it was given in good faith, would have a chilling effect on the entire legal profession.
Right. It would make them afraid to do their jobs.
Exactly. And that would make it harder for them to contribute to all these crucial areas of reform.
It's like they're saying, look, if you punish lawyers for giving advice, even if it turns out to be wrong later, you're going to discourage good lawyers from practicing at all.
Yeah.
And then who's left to uphold the law and fight for those important reforms?
That's a key point.
Yeah.
It's something the Indonesian court really has to grapple with
Absolutely.
as they decide Sonda's case.
I think this amicus brief has given us all a lot to think about.
Definitely.
It goes beyond just this one case, this one lawyer.
It raises questions about the whole role of law in society.
Right.
About the balance of power.
Yeah.
And what can happen when prosecution goes unchecked.
It's made us think about how to balance holding people accountable for doing wrong with protecting the people who are supposed to uphold the law.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
No easy answers there.
Nope.
I have a feeling this case and all the debate it sparked is far from over.
I agree. This case is pushing the limits of what we consider ethical for lawyers and what it means to be a responsible professional.
It's making us face this reality that even when you're trying your best, doing your job can land you in serious trouble.
It's a sobering thought.
Before we wrap up our deep dive into this brief,
Okay.
there's one more thing we should look at.
All right.
The specific recommendations the brief makes to the court.
Right, the Jakarta Selatan Court.
This is where we'll see how the Indonesian Advocate Solidarity Committee for Justice thinks this case should be handled.
Yeah, let's see what they propose.
So they're not just complaining, they're actually trying to be helpful.
Right.
Okay, what are some of the things they suggest the court should do?
Well, the most important thing is they're asking the court to really think about Sonda's actions.
Okay.
In light of what he's supposed to do as a lawyer, they're saying, don't just see him as someone who made a mistake,
Right.
but as a member of this profession
Yeah.
with its own set of rules and responsibilities.
So don't just look at the exact words of the law, but consider the bigger picture and how lawyers are supposed to act.
Exactly.
Got it.
And they even go further.
Okay.
They recommend that the court talks to the Ethics Council of the Indonesian Bar Association, get their professional opinion on whether Sonda actually broke any of those ethical rules.
It's interesting, right?
Yeah.
It's like they're saying the legal profession itself should have a say in how the law is applied to one of their own.
It kind of goes back to that whole idea of self-regulation we talked about.
Right.
The brief argues that the Bar Association, they're the ones who really understand if a lawyer acted in good faith or
Yeah.
not law enforcement.
Okay, so what happens if the Bar Association disagrees with the court?
Mm.
What if they say Sonda was ethical, but the court still says he's guilty?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure the brief really answers it,
Okay.
but it does warn about the dangers of making this a precedent,
Right.
where giving legal advice, even if it's done in good faith,
Yeah.
could lead to criminal charges.
It's like they're saying, hey, court, if you punish Sonda, you might make it much harder for lawyers to do their jobs properly,
Exactly.
which could end up hurting the rule of law that you're trying to protect.
It's a tough situation for the Jakarta Selaton court to deal with.
It really is.
A real balancing act.
So for our listeners who've joined us for this deep dive,
Yeah.
what are the big takeaways here?
I'd say the most important is that lawyers are much more complex than people think.
Right. They're not just these guys in suits arguing in courtrooms.
Exactly.
They help all of us understand and use the law in everyday life.
And when we try to criminalize legal advice,
Yeah.
even if that advice was wrong, we're basically silencing the people who are essential for a fair legal system.
This whole case brings up some really deep questions
It does.
about what it means to be a lawyer and what ethical behavior is in the legal world.
It also makes us realize that even doing your job the best you can sometimes have consequences you'd never expect.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And as we finish up, here's one last question for everyone listening.
Okay.
Imagine you're a lawyer in Indonesia right now. Would this case make you think twice about the advice you give your clients?
That's a question we should all be asking ourselves.
It really shows how tricky it can be
Yeah.
to balance upholding the law with protecting those who help us navigate it.
And that's really the core of this case, I think.
It's been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
See you next time.